With the end of 2024 means the end of my 2024 reading journal, and today we're going to do a little flip through of my reading journal from last year. I have over 40 different types of spreads in this journal, and they're all filled out, so I'm going to show you what every spread looks like completely filled out so that you can get some inspiration for your 2025 reading journal. And this is actually the 5th year that I've done a reading journal, and this is my favorite journal that I've done so far, so I'm really looking forward to showing it to you. So let's jump in. So in my reading journal videos, I often get asked what type of journal I use, and I use the Ottergami A5 faux leather journal in pink, and this is the 5th year that I've used this journal, and I really recommend it. I love it. So here we just have the title page for my 2024 reading journal, and next you can see that it's my index. This is just a really nice way to keep track of what spreads are on which pages, and as you can see, this journal goes up to 136 pages. So whenever I'm looking for a particular spread, I can just come here, see what page it's on, and then flip to that particular page. I will say that this journal doesn't have its own page numbers. I have to put them in myself. As you can see down here, it has a little 2, but that's not a big deal to me. I like that I can customize it to how I want it to look. Then over here we have my 2024 reading goals. As you can see, I have 7 goals. I never ended up coming up with an 8th one, which is fine. And as you can see, when I completed a goal, I colored the box in and marked it off with an X. So you can see that these 2 goals I did not accomplish, but these 5 I did. So for example, I read more translated fiction. I listened to more audiobooks. I read 30 minutes a day every day for 1 whole month, and I read over my 65 book goal. Then over here is the beginning of my 24 books I want to read in 2024 spread. So at the beginning of the year, I put which books I wanted to make sure that I read in 2024. I put a little picture of all 24 books. And then after I read the book, I put my star rating below it. Over here, it looks a little bit funny because as you can see everywhere else, it's just 1 book. But my goal was to read a Donna Tartt book. It didn't matter to me which one that I read. But in the end, I ended up reading The Goldfinch. And so I put my star rating below there because that's the one that I read. So as you can see, I didn't read every single 24 and 24 book, and that's totally fine. But it's just a really nice way to keep track of what did I hope to read from this 24 and 2024 TBR. I often get questions about how I get these pictures of the book covers because we're going to see a lot of this used later in the journal, and I simply just print out the covers on regular printer paper. I copy all the book covers to a Canva spreadsheet and then just size them to how I need them for my journal, and that's just a lot of trial and error to figure out what size you need for your journal and your spread. But yeah, they're literally just printed onto printer paper. Next, over here we have my spread where I kept track of how many books did I read in 2024, and you can see my goal was to read 65 books, and so I did number each box 1 by 1 up to 65, but then I did give myself some space in case I went past 65 books, which indeed I did. I went up to 77 books in 2024, so this is just a nice visual way to keep track of where am I in my reading goal. Then over here I have a little spread to keep track of which days did I read in 2024, so you can see every month has its own column, and I put a little dot if I read at all that day. It doesn't matter how long, even if it was just for 5 minutes, I was able to put a dot. Then over here on the right, you can see that for each month, I marked how many days did I read that month, and then at the end of the year, I was able to write down that I read 206 days out of the 366 days of 2024, and I did a little calculation to figure out that that was 56% of the days in 2024 I read. Then my next spread is actually in connection to some of my goals. One of my goals is to read 30 minutes every day. I don't literally expect myself to read literally 30 minutes every single day. It's just something that I shoot for. So whereas here is just that I keep track of if I read at all that day, here is where I keep track of did I read 30 minutes. So as I said before, one of my goals was to read 30 minutes every day for 1 whole month, and you can see here that I accomplished that goal in November. So this is just a really nice visual to see how am I doing on that goal. Then over here on this spread, I keep track of which days do I finish a book. I was hoping to see if there were any particular trends, you know, do I finish books more at the beginning of the month, in the middle of the month, at the end of the month? And we're going to see later in the journal that I did figure out some statistics from this. So this spread is what helped me calculate those statistics that we will see later in the journal. Then over here, I have a little alphabet challenge. This is not something that I'm actively trying to complete. It's just fun to see how do I do at the end of the year without even really trying. So you can see there's a few letters that I didn't accomplish. That's totally fine. It was just fun to keep track of throughout the year. Then my next spread are different reading challenges that I set for myself in 2024. So for example, read a book in 1 day, read a book over 700 pages, read a book randomly chosen at the bookstore. So I just had different prompts for myself. And as soon as I accomplished the prompt, I printed out the picture of the book that helped me accomplish that prompt, and I put it into the little box. So for example, the book that I read in 1 day, it was Paradise Rock. The book I randomly chose at the bookstore was The Ring. So again, I didn't accomplish every single challenge. That's totally fine. Then on the next spread, I put the Pop Sugar reading challenge, and I'm going to be honest, this was really difficult. Again, it's not something that I was actively trying to accomplish. I would just read something and see if it fit into one of the prompts afterwards. These prompts were really difficult, so actually I'm going to do a video later about my 2025 2025 reading journal, and I didn't put this in my 2025 reading journal because it was so difficult to complete all the prompts. Again, it would have been easier if I was actually trying to accomplish them, but just to have something fun in my journal, it really wasn't working for me. So I wouldn't really recommend this spread unless you're actively looking for a challenge. Then I think it would be great. Then over here on the left is where I keep track of how many books did I read per month. As you can see, my reading, it gets really low in the summer and then comes back out at the winter. Then over here on the right is where I keep more specific statistics for each month. So how many books did I read? How many pages did I read? How many books were fiction? How many were nonfiction? How many were originally written in English? How many were translated? How many days in that month did I read 30 minutes a day? How many books did I read from my 24 and 2024 list? How many rereads did I do? How many 5 stars did I have? And how many books did I buy? So I have all of that information for all 12 months of 2024. And the way that I get all this information are from spreads later on in the journal. So we'll see more about these statistics later. Also, I just want to say, if you're finding this video helpful, I would really appreciate it if you gave the video a like. It really helps more people see the video and so that they can get inspiration as well. It really helps my channel and I would just really appreciate it. Thank you so much in advance if you like the video, and just thanks for being here watching the video anyways. I hope that you're enjoying it. Next, over here on the left, I have my monthly star rating. So it's where I keep track for every month how many of each star rating did I have. So for example, in January I had 1 3-star, 1 3.5 star, 3 4 stars. You can see how it continues from there. And then I put my average star rating for each month over here on the right. So this is just a really nice visual way to see when did I have lower star ratings. Also, it was able to help me calculate my average star rating for the entire year. So my average star rating for the whole year was 4.24 stars, which was great. Then over here on the right, I have a spread where I keep track of the books that I do not recommend. So books that I did not like in 2024. So I keep track of the title of the book and the author of the book. Luckily, I didn't have to use this entire spread. I only didn't like 8 books out of the 77 books that I read in 2024. Then my next spread is the 2024 best book bracket, where basically I put all the best books that I read in the year against each other to see what was my best book of the entire year. So I put the cover of the book over here and then put the title of the book over here right into the bracket. So you can see in January it was The Drifting Classroom, in February it was The Goldfinch, March it was Soldier Sailor. But you'll notice that I don't put January against February, March against April. I want to be able to mix up the beginning of the year with the end of the year, so I put January versus July, April versus October. So the way that I did that is that I went, so first part of the bracket, January, then I skipped to the next bracket over here, February, then to the next bracket over here, March, and then kind of did the same thing for the rest of the months of the year. And that allowed me to mix up the books from the entire year. The hardest part about this bracket is when I have a really good reading month. For example, in November, I had my best reading month of the entire year. I had so many favorites and just choosing one was really difficult. And then in other months where I didn't necessarily have something that I absolutely loved, nothing that I would say is a new favorite or anything, it's just something that I enjoyed, and then I had to say it was my favorite book of the month. So I think that that's the most difficult part about doing the bracket, is that it's not totally representative of every book that I love this year. And as you can see, The Goldfinch won the best book of the entire year. Then on this page, we have my 5-star favorites. So these are all books that I rated 5 stars, and they're my favorite 5 stars that I gave. So I did give other 5 stars throughout the year, but these are my top 5 stars. And not only are these my favorite 5 stars of the year, they're also actually ranked from my most favorite 5-star to my least favorite 5-star. So they're not in the order that I read them, they are literally in the order of my favorite, because I use these little Velcro stickers to be able to reorder the books in the order that I want them. So actually, The Drifting Classroom, this book was actually the first book that made this list. So for a long time it was up here, but then slowly throughout the year I read more and more books, and it got pushed down further and further in the rankings to where at the end of the year it ended up down here. So these are the little Velcro stickers that I use. I just found them on Amazon. They're pretty cheap and they last a really long time. They came with multiple sheets like this, and I really recommend, because I have been loving being able to move things around. This is not the only spread where I use those Velcro strips in this journal, so we'll see more examples later, but I really recommend. This next spread is where I keep track of how many pages did I read per month. And so I have a visual bar graph over here, and then over here I have literally how many pages it was, just to remember exactly how many pages it was. And just for reference, for my scale of my journal, each little box is 50 pages. So this spread is what helps me complete this spread. So remember, I keep track of how many pages did I read per month right here. This spread is what helps me fill that out. But actually what helps me fill out this spread comes from a later spread. So everything kind of works together in my journal. I start small at the monthly spreads, which we'll see later, and then I kind of work backwards to get the big picture statistics. Next, we have the genres that I read. So as you can see, I mostly read literary fiction, nonfiction, and manga this year, with some horror and thriller mixed in, and I didn't get into any of these genres down here. I did decide to split this manga manga one because since manga is so fast to read, I would have needed to go off of this chart, so I ended up splitting this up, which was obviously a good idea because I would have gone off this chart if I hadn't done that. Next, we have the pages per book spread, where of course I just keep track of how many pages were each book that I read. Based on my statistics from the previous year, I gave myself 2 rows for the 200 to 299 page section and the 300 to 399 page section. So these 2 rows are both for 200 to 299, and same thing for 300 to 399. Next is my hours read per month spread, where I keep track of how many hours did I read every single month, and then similarly to the pages spread that we just saw, I keep a bar graph over here and then write down exactly how many hours it was over here. Again, I keep track of this information more precisely in a later spread in the individual monthly spreads, and then I come to this spread, but we'll see that later. And just in case you're curious, I use the app Bookly to keep track of my time. I literally just set the Bookly timer every single time that I read, and it keeps track of how many hours per month that I read. This is not sponsored, but I really recommend that app if you're interested in keeping track of your hours read. Next, as we saw previously, one of my big goals for 2024 was to read more translated fiction, and so I used this Read Around the World spread to keep track of which countries did I read from. Now, of course, I did read from Anglophone countries as well as non-Anglophone countries, but I kept track of where did each author of the books I read last year, where did they come from? So it's not where did the book take place, it's where is the author from. So of course I got a lot of North America, some of South America, a lot of Europe, India, Japan. Unfortunately, I didn't get any Africa in 2024. I did in 2023, but I hadn't started this spread yet, so that's really unfortunate. And I didn't get any Oceania, and I need to do that next year. So in the end, I can see that I read from 14 different countries in 2024. Next is a little line graph that I did where I kept track of how many books did I read per month and also how many pages did I read per month. So the stars are keeping track of how many books and the dots are keeping track of how many pages. So as we already saw in some previous data, my reading really dropped in the summer and then went back up in the fall and winter. Next, over here on the left, I kept track of my rereads. I really don't reread as much as I would like to, so I started keeping track of when I do. So you can see that I reread 5 books in 2024. Then over here on the right, I kept track of which library books did I read and what was the format of me reading them. So for example, if we take this last one, the 14th one, I read Aftermath by Rachel Cusk on ebook. But up here, the first one, I read Butts, A Backstory by Heather Radke. I read that on audiobook. So this is just a nice way to see, am I utilizing my library throughout the year? Then my next spread is keeping track of all the manga that I'm reading. I have one little box for each series, and then I have a little row for each of the volumes in that series. So if we take Nana, for example, there are 21 volumes of Nana, and I own all 21 volumes, so I have written in which chapters are in each of the volumes that I have, and then once I read that volume, I color it in and put a little X. So for example, for Yona of the Dawn, there's actually more than 16 volumes for Yona of the Dawn, but I just cut it off here. But you can see that I only own the first 3 volumes, so I've only put those chapter numbers in so far. And I've only read the first volume, so only the first volume is colored in. So this is just a nice way to keep track of where am I at in my manga series, because it's easy to get overwhelmed with manga because there's so many volumes in one series usually. Next is my anticipated releases spread. No, I never went back and fixed that. I don't really care. It wasn't a big deal to me to fix it. But anyway, this is where I keep track of the books that are coming out each month and whether or not I got myself a copy of it. So I did this little Dutch door, which is really easy to do. You just need to figure out where you want to cut the page. So obviously this was just a normal page before, and I just cut it to make it into smaller pages. And then like I said, each month I just kept track of which books were coming out that I was excited about. So of course, if I have an empty box here like this, that means that I didn't end up getting the book, but if I colored it in and marked it off, that means I bought that book. However, there were some books that came out that I didn't buy, but I did read, for example, from my library. So for example, The Night Guest, that was a horror novella that came out this year. I did read that from my library, but I didn't buy it. So I still marked it off because I read it, but I didn't color it in because I didn't buy it. Down here is where I started keeping track of 2025 releases so that I could copy them to my 2025 reading journal. This is kind of sloppy to me, so I ended up fixing this in my 2025 journal, so you'll see that in a future video how I ended up fixing this. Then my next spread is my books hauled spread. So I love buying books, so this is where I keep track of every single book that I bought in 2024. So here I'm listing the title of the book, what day did I get the book. Over here I mark if I read the book, and then over here is just for me because since I have my channel and I want to know if I hauled that book or not. And then over here I keep track of how much did it cost. So I live in France, so my money is in euros over here. And also I get a lot of books as gifts, so if I got it as a gift, I put it in parentheses so that I know that I didn't spend the money on that book. So you can see I bought lots of books in 2024. I have lots of pages here of different books that I bought. And then the last book that I bought was was on December 31st. So again, like I said, later I have more statistics about all my different spreads, and so we're going to see some statistics about my book buying habits a bit later. Then is a little spread that I made about my 2024 ARCs. So these are just advanced reader copies, books that are given to book reviewers early so that they can read them before they come out. And as you can see, I made a lot of spaces for ARCs this year, but in the end I ended up only asking for 2, and these are the 2 that I got. So yeah, I ended up not needing this much space, but that's fine. I put the 2 books that I did ask for and I did get a copy of. Then my next spread is my halfway top 12. So at the end of June, I could know what were my top 12 books. So again, similarly to this spread where it kind of changed around, you know, initially this was the first book, but then as I read more books, things got moved around. It worked the same way here. So like this was the first book on this list. So at the beginning, this was here, but then as I read more and more books, things got moved around more. Also, things got pushed off the list. You know, there used to be other books on this list, but they got pushed off once I read these books, and the list kind of pushed them off the back end. So I've had to throw away book covers because they got kicked off the list. So this was my top 12 at the end of June so that I could know for the first 6 months of the year what were my favorite books. Then this locked in. I copy pasted basically. I did the exact same thing over here starting July 1st. And then as I continued reading throughout the rest of the year, my list totally evolved. You'll see things over here that were not over here because I read them after July 1st. So you can see that these 4 things, they're not over here. They got kicked off the list by some other books here. And so you can see over here, I had the Goldfinch and Soldier Sailor. So that would have been the same. It would have been like this on July 1st, but then in November when I read My Husband, okay, well, Soldier Sailor got bumped to 3rd place and My Husband got put in 2nd place. So again, these little things are a lifesaver. I loved using them to be able to move things around. I really recommend using them. Then my next spread is just a visual of all the books that I read and what star rating did I give them. So I go like this. You can see that I number them beside the book covers. Again, I'm just printing the book covers so that I can have a quick little visual of all the books that I read in 2024. And then the last book, the 77th book that I read last year, is right here at the end. I really enjoy this spread because it's nice just to go through and quickly see which books did I read exactly. And also if I don't remember a star rating that I gave a book, it's nice just to be able to quickly flip here and see, okay, what did I rate that book? Then this spread is exactly the same thing as what we just saw, but it's just me writing the title of the books. I just love filling things out in my reading journal, so that's why I did this spread. But actually you're going to see in my 2025 journal, I did get rid of this spread because I found it unnecessary, but I kept up with it throughout the year anyway. Then we have my published date of each book that I read. So I made these little groupings of years. You know, some are bigger groupings of years, and then as we get more present, it's just 1 year. And I keep track of which year was the book I just finished, published, and then I was able to see, okay, what are the distributions of the years of these books that I'm reading. I will say that I reworked these year groupings in my 2025 journal, so if you're interested in that, keep an eye out for that video because I didn't really find this to be representative because this is a 9-year grouping and you can see how big it is because the Nana series that I read was all fit into here. But I just think that it could be better represented, so I did something completely different in my 2025 journal, but this is what I did last year and it worked for me. I could see that I read a lot of newer releases as well. But yeah, I think next year it's going to be a better representation of what I read. Then I did a book bingo. Over here you can see the board. So what were the prompts that I had to accomplish? And rather than putting the book cover on top of the prompt that it's achieving, I wanted to put it over here so that I could still see what were the prompts that I was accomplishing. So for example, a multiple point of view thriller, I read No Exit, so I colored it in and put the book cover over here. Honestly, I did pretty well because there's only 3 spots that I didn't fill in, so I'm pretty happy with the results of my book bingo. Then I have my 2024 prizes. So kind of if I was doing an award show at the end of the year, which books would win what prizes. So again, we have the best book that I read, The Goldfinch, the best literary fiction, My Husband, the best thriller, No Exit. But again, I'm using these little stickers because this obviously changes throughout the year, what I think the best is. So for example, the best literary fiction for almost the entire year, I had Soldier Sailor up here by Claire Kilroy. But then in November, I read My Husband by Maud Ventura. And as we already saw back here, Soldier Sailor got bumped by My Husband. So, you know, again, the Velcro strips are helping me be able to move things around throughout the year as things get bumped and keep the latest information represented on this spread. So I have prizes for different types of genre of book, but also what is the best series, the best book under 200 pages, the best book that I read for the 2024 prize season, which book made me cry the most, what was the most beautiful book that I bought, who's my new favorite author, all different types of things. So those were all the general yearly spreads, and now I get into the individual month spreads. So every month has a little home page like this. So obviously the first one we're going to have is January, and this is where I keep track of all my statistics for the month of January. So remember how I said that I use the app Bookly to keep track of my reading every day, so it keeps track of how many pages did I read and how long did I read every single day. And I just copy that information into this little table right here, and then I'm able to add up all these numbers. So if we take the pages, these are all the pages that I read, I add it all up, and then I can put it over here that I read 3,646 pages in January, and then I can add up the time over here from these columns, and I can say that I read 25 hours and 50 minutes in January. Then if we go back to this spread, I can see how many books did I buy in January, and I can fill out this little bubble. So I hold 21 books in January. You can also see my breakdown of fiction versus nonfiction throughout the month, what were my star ratings, and what were the genres and how many of each genre did I read in the month. And then you can see here that I read 10 books in January. This was my favorite book that I read in the month of January, and this is my least favorite book that I read in the month of January. So remember how I said that I start small in the monthly spread? So this is starting small. This is literally every single day's statistics. Then I add it up and put it here, and then I take this information. So remember I said I read this many pages. Then I go back to this spread, and you can see I can fill out the bar graph for how many pages I read in January. And then I take that information and bring it to this spread where I can say that I read this many pages in January. So you can see it all starts really small on the monthly spread, and then I take this information and put it in previous spreads to get a bigger global picture where I can compare it to other months. So like I said, I kind of consider this my homepage for every month. I do this every single month, and then after the homepage, I keep track of which books did I read that month, and I put all my individual statistics for each month and then a tiny little review. So for example, if we take, I have Convenience Store Woman. It was 163 pages. It took me an hour and 52 minutes to read it. It's literary fiction. I read it physically. I gave it a 4.75 stars, and then this is my little review of the book. So I do that for every single book that I read. So again, these were the 10 books that I read in January, and then I just flip and I'm at February's homepage. So you can see that I'm going to be doing this every single month to be able to get all my statistics to fill out my yearly spreads. So these were the books that I read in February. Here's my March homepage. Here I was not able to commit to a book that was the worst because I read pretty good books in March. So I just put an X. I didn't want to commit to saying that one was bad because I did really enjoy all of the books that I read that month. Then some special little spreads that I did in the month of March was one because the Women's Prize for Fiction long list was announced. So I put every single book that was longlisted for the Women's Prize in 2024. And then when I read a couple of them, I put the star rating just below so you can see that I read 3 books from the long list last year. And as soon as there was a short list, I made a little note which of the books were shortlisted. And then once they announced the winner, I put the winner here. So when they are shortlisted, I do just pencil this in because I don't know who's going to win because I want to write winner in pen. But yeah, so this is what the spread looks like completely finished. And not only was the Women's Prize for Fiction long list announced, also the International Booker Prize long list was announced. So I did exactly the same thing. So again, you can see my ratings for the different books that I read, which books were shortlisted, and which one was the winner. Then we go to my April homepage and all the books that I read in April. Then my May homepage, all the books that I read in May. Here we have something a little bit different that I DNF'd my first book in the month of May. So I don't DNF that often, but here I did DNF this book, and I said that I DNF'd at 89 pages. I had read an hour and 57 minutes on audio, and I just wanted to keep track that I DNF'd this book. Then my June statistics, all the books that I read in June. I was committed to Nana in June, as you can see. Then my July statistics, this was my worst reading month. I only read 1 book. Then my August statistics, the books I read in August. My September homepage, the books I read in September. My October homepage, the books I read in October. My November homepage. As you could see, even though I committed to My Husband being my favorite book of November, I loved so many books in November, so I had to put them all here. And as you can see, as I talked about before, I read for at least 30 minutes every single day in November, so you can see that reflected here. And that I read 44 hours and 16 minutes in November, which was my best reading month. And I actually didn't buy a single book in November, but I had the best reading month of my life in November. Then the first 6 books that I read in November, and actually this is the last page of this journal, so I had to get my next journal, which is the one where my 2024 journal ends and also my 2025 journal begins. So again, I'm using exactly the same journal. I love this journal, could not recommend it more. And this is where I finished the rest of my November books, and I DNF'd my second book of the year, even though I said that it's a soft DNF. I will go back to this book eventually, but I put it down. Then we have my December homepage and the books that I read in December. So then, since it was the end of the year, I was able to do some end of year spreads, including this one, again, which I absolutely love. It's every single book that I read in 2024. All 77 books are represented on this little spread. It fits perfectly in this square. I love it so much. I was really inspired by Books and Lala. If you watch her content, you know that she likes to organize things by color and make a little perfect square. So I took some inspiration from her, and I just think it looks really, really nice. It's really satisfying to look at, I think. So yeah, this is just a quick glance at all 77 books that I read last year. Then, using all the information that I collected throughout the year in my reading journal, I was able to make some final statistics about my reading in this final little spread. So here you can see I read 77 books. Here's the breakdown of all the genres that I read, my star ratings, how many pages I read, my average star rating, how many hours I read for the year, my favorite book, my nonfiction to fiction breakdown, how many days did I read, the format of books that I read, how many days did I read for at least 30 minutes, how many did I read in translation, how many rereads, how many library books, what is the origin of the authors that I read, what country are they from, here that I read from 14 countries, the average age of my book, the authors, have I already read from them before or were they new to me, the mood of the books that I was reading. I know that Storygraph does this, but I actually made this myself. I took the moods from Storygraph, but then I actually went through and classified each book myself, because I think that Storygraph classifies books in multiple moods and I only wanted them to be in one mood. So I went through and decided for myself what were the moods. Then, if you remember this spread where I kept track of what days did I finish a book, I took that data and was able to make this spread. So I figured out that I mostly finished books between the 25th and the 31st of the month, so almost 30%. Whereas from the 1st to the 8th, I only finished books 20% of the time, which makes sense because I want to finish books to be able to count them for that particular month. So this was an interesting little statistic for me. I kept track of my 2024 goals. We already saw that I didn't accomplish 2 of them, but I did accomplish 5. I read 7 of my 24 and 2024 TBR. I read 32 manga. This one was really interesting. Remember that I have this spread keeping track of all the books that I bought in 2024, and I keep track if I read them or not with a little X in this column. Well, I did the calculations and I read exactly 50% of the books that I bought in 2024, and that I still need to read 50%. Like exactly 50%. It worked out perfectly. So actually, I'm pretty happy with that. If I had to have guessed before doing that calculation, I wouldn't have said that I read 50% of them. So I'm really happy with that. Then again, I took inspiration from the Storygraph where they calculate if a book is slow paced, medium paced, fast paced. Again, I calculated that myself because sometimes I don't agree with Storygraph if they say it's slow, medium, or fast. So I went through every single book and calculated that myself. Some information about my book buying and arcs and how many DNFs I did. So that was my 2024 reading journal. I hope you got a lot of inspiration for your own reading journal. I will be doing another video where I flip through my 2025 journal because, like I said, I made lots of changes between my 2024 and my 2025 journal. So if you're interested in seeing more about what didn't work in this journal and what I ended up changing for my 2025 journal, make sure you keep an eye out for that video. If you found this video helpful, I would really appreciate it if you gave it a like because it really helps the video get pushed out to more people so that more people can see it, and I would really appreciate that. And if you haven't subscribed already, I would love for you to subscribe so you can see all my future reading journal videos. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to put them in the comments, and I hope to see you again next time. Bye!